our webinar today on how to put margins in the centre of your business. I'm Sophie Lewis, Marketing Executive at Equiteq, based in our London office, and I'm joined today by Paul Beaumont, also from our London team, and Pat Webb, based in North America. If you've got any questions during the webinar, please use the controls panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll find the questions box at the bottom. So over to you, T.
Thanks, Sophie, and thank you to everyone for joining us. The key message from today is if you're not putting margins at the center of your business thinking, then you're not building equity value in the firm, which you could unlock at a later time. Now, we'd like to spend the next 20 minutes or so addressing 4 key questions. How's profit viewed by those who buy or invest in consulting firms? How do we know what good looks like? How do we make it better? And where should we start? So, Paul, let's take the first of these. How is profit viewed by those who buy or invest in consulting firms?
Well, it sounds like stating the obvious, but profit is of paramount importance. Actually, it may not be quite that obvious because when owners grow their businesses, they typically think first of the top line of revenue. If you look at the graph on the left of the slide, it shows a comparison of revenue and margin for 2 companies. In fact, Company A, with 20 million revenue and 3 million of profit, is likely to be less valuable than Company B, which posts the same 3 million profit from just 15 million of sales, all other things being equal. Not only is the margin itself important, but to create optimum value, it needs to be growing steadily. This is important because an investor will see steady growth as more likely to be sustainable and therefore lower risk.
Right, so bottom line profit's most important, but top line matters too, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, there's certainly an issue of critical mass here for one thing. A firm that turns over less than 5 million, even if it has good margins, isn't going to be interesting to a very large number of investors. Secondly, how revenue is spread across your clients is also important. If too much comes from too few clients, then the business will be viewed as risky by an investor. Or indeed, it is risky because if you lose just 1 or 2 clients, the business will quickly be in trouble. If you look at the graph on the right-hand side, you'll see that Company B has a much healthier spread of clients than Company A because it's not over-reliant on just 1 or 2 clients. As a general rule, you shouldn't have more than 20% of revenue from just 1 client. And lastly, I'd like to say that not all revenue is equal. Recurring revenue from long-term contracts is highly attractive to investors because it's inherently more predictable than a series of one-off engagements.
Sorry,
Okay.
Paul, can I just interrupt you for a second? Perfect.
Sure.
We just need to see the slides. Okay, thanks very much.
Oh, perfect! I love it. It's live. We appreciate your your help to us there, Sophie. Yeah. So, Paul, you confirmed that margin is critically important. Well, what does good margin look like to an investor?
Yeah, sorry about that problem with the slide there. So 20% EBIT is a pretty good target to achieve, especially if you can do it consistently. So if you think of $100 of revenue and you spend 50 of those on delivering your services, that's your direct costs, and 30 more on overheads, that's marketing, selling and running the business, then that leaves 20 for your EBIT.
Right, so using that model, can we look at each of these 3 elements of revenue, delivery costs and overheads, and can you talk specifically about what management teams can do to improve margins by increasing revenue and reducing costs?
Sure, well let's begin with how to increase revenue. There are 3 things to consider here, and that is pricing, marketing and bid management. Firstly, increase your prices to drive up revenue. Charging higher fees for higher value work is a top strategic priority. So be really clear about the benefits that your clients will see from working with you and link your fees to that value either implicitly through fixed fee contracts or explicitly through some kind of gain sharing. Furthermore, if you can demonstrate that you're the only ones who can deliver the benefit because you're so specialized with your unique IP, your methodology and expertise, then you can protect your higher fees. So put your prices up. This can be as simple as it sounds, especially if your fees are already lower than the market rates charged by your competition. And therefore find out what they charge and price at or above their rates. And don't be squeamish about this. If you can describe the benefit the client will get, then you can demonstrate that investing in your services, and always describe it as an investment, by the way, rather than a cost, will be worth it. Of course, you may feel there's absolutely no movement possible in fees, and this may be right if you're closer to a commodity offering in a highly competitive space. If this is the case, then you should certainly be looking at moving away from those types of services and replacing them with higher value ones. Secondly, focus marketing to get better business. Well, marketing's job is not simply to get more leads, it's to get better leads that would generate higher margin business. So make sure that they have clear guidance on which clients to target with clearly articulated value propositions. And finally, manage the bid process to protect your margins. You can lose a lot of margin before you've even begun the work. Your bids have to be managed so that the scope is unambiguous and that the terms and conditions are as favorable as possible. And to achieve this, you need to ensure that the team who leads the bid process is skilled commercially as well as technically, and that the process is properly defined and managed, and that you've got favorable templated terms and conditions.
So self-evidently, margin's the gap between revenue and costs. So Paul, you've spoken about how to increase that gap by increasing revenue. What about the other part? What about driving down costs?
Yeah, sure. Well, again, there are three items to focus on here, and this time they're leverage, quality, and utilization. So firstly, improve leverage to maximize engagement profitability. Leverage is the ratio of senior staff to junior staff, and you should staff projects with the lowest cost resource that is capable of delivering the best quality outcomes. And many consultancies struggle to achieve this because they don't delegate as much delivery work as possible to the lowest level possible. Expensive senior people do too much delivery, and this eats into margin and stops those senior people adding more value to the business through developing more business and IP, etc. In other words, you don't just reduce the margin on the current project, you perpetuate the problem on future projects too, which is why it's a top strategic priority. Now, in order to safely deploy lower cost resources onto projects, you need to have codified your methodologies, you need to have standard templates, and you need to train the consultants to deliver the work. Secondly, assure the quality of your services so that you can deploy the lower cost resources. Incongruously, perhaps, many consulting firms do not have formal, effective quality control processes for their work.
Yeah, and Paul, a quick interrupt if I may, because that reminds me of a lesson here from the automotive industry. If you go around a car assembly plant today, you're not going to find it crawling with all those white-coated quality inspectors that used to be fussing over their micrometers. 40 years ago, that's exactly what you would have seen. Yet cars have become incredibly more complex and far more reliable than ever. So how has the automotive industry achieved this? By designing quality into the processes so that cars can only be built one way, the right way, every time, by people who are fully trained to use the right tools on the right materials in the right sequence, always. So the consulting firm challenge is exactly the same. Train and motivate your lower cost consultants to deliver high quality work using rigorous methodologies and proven templates every time.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good example, Pat. So the final point on this slide is to manage utilization to balance capacity with demand. Now, billable utilization needs to be accurately measured to ensure that you know the workload of each individual consultant, and you should also measure the actual profitability of each project. Once you know this, you can deal with projects that do not meet the required margin, and you can balance the work across your consulting team to ensure a healthy overall contribution. If there are individuals in the delivery team who are consistently low on utilization, you need to address the issue either by enhancing their skills or by moving them out of the business. Conversely, if there are people whose utilization is too high, you need to address that as well, because it's unlikely to be sustainable, and you're probably not getting as much value from them as you could in terms of IP development and so on. And finally, on this topic, if you use subcontractors to deliver some of your services, you should aim at achieving at least 50% gross margin from them.
Okay, so that covers delivery costs. What about overheads?
Yes, well, it's important to recognize that overhead spend can be too low as well as too high. Now, obviously, if overheads are too high, then that will eat into the margin. However, if they're too low, then it might be that you're under-investing in the business and constraining growth. So they need to be optimized. Spending about 30% of revenue on overheads is about right for most consulting firms. And it's helpful to think of overheads as falling into three buckets, each being about 10% of revenue. And those buckets are business development, that is sales and marketing, managing the business, that's management and administration costs, and sustaining the business, that's property costs, professional fees, IT, stuff that you simply have to run the business. So optimize those three buckets of business development, managing, and sustaining costs. Let's take these three one at a time. How do you ensure business development spend positively contributes to margin? Well, interestingly, we more often find firms spend too little here rather than too much. It's important to spend at a level that ensures the generation and conversion of high quality leads, and this means being very focused on attracting the right potential clients who have needs that your well-articulated value proposition will address. Of course, it is possible to spend too much on, say, expensive salespeople who underperform, or on poorly controlled and badly targeted marketing budgets. You need therefore to know what you're spending and to measure the results carefully so that you make sure you're getting real value for money. Moving on to management costs, it is once again not unusual to find that consultancies have grown from small beginnings and that they have underinvested in management support. We find, for example, that one of the founders in the team may still be managing the finances, keeping him or her from adding more value through, say, business development activities. Investing initially in a part-time finance director would free up more time for business development, and, needless to say, a competent FD should provide valuable insight into ways of improving margin yet again. It is, on the other hand, easily possible to overspend on management and administration costs, and these should always be kept under review, especially if they're consistently higher than 10% of revenue. And one way in which management costs can get out of hand is if the management team pays itself much more than market rates, which may be a temptation, but if you're building a business to sell rather than running a lifestyle consultancy, it is one you need to resist. The sustaining costs in consultancy are usually fairly slim. The cost of offices, however, is often a significant proportion of sustaining costs, and our advice here is to avoid the temptation of opening too many offices too soon. Just because you have a client in a different region does not mean you have to open an office there. And we sometimes work with clients who've opened offices in a number of different locations, most of which have ended up being subscale, dragging down overall margin. And this geographic spread also reduces their attractiveness to buyers and may require some pruning of operations to deliver healthy margins and become sellable.
And I think we should say a word or two about IT, Paul. Being able to produce financial information, to be able to control projects, and to have a suite of effective business KPIs that can be produced efficiently is obviously important for any business. And having this capability is an important part of due diligence in a transaction process too. Many consultancies try to muddle through on a mixture of standalone packages plus spreadsheets, the ubiquitous spreadsheets of course, but this eventually becomes a false economy. There are some excellent professional services automation platforms designed specifically for consultancies, NetSuite, Financial Force, and Kimball, for example. And once the business gets over a certain size and beyond a certain level of complexity, these sophisticated tools are really indispensable.
Yeah, that's a great point, Pat. Thank you. Well, finally, I'd like to say something about timing. What you do needs to be informed by how close you are to a transaction. Obviously, don't buy a brand new IT system if you intend to begin a transaction process in a couple of months. And if you're about to go to market, then clearly there are adjustments that can be made to the accounts to reflect the underlying performance of the business and one-off investments that can be removed, for example, thereby maximizing reported margins.
Okay, so where do we recommend starting? We'd suggest that there are 4 work streams. And the first of those work streams follows the classic consulting approach. Create a baseline and set your targets. Measure current margins by client, project, and service line. And measure current utilization. Now you know the as-is state. Set targets for the to-be state and make sure there's clear accountabilities for those targets. So for example, engagement managers should be accountable for client satisfaction, revenue, and the cost of resources consumed on the engagement. So in this first work stream, make sure there's a reporting process established to track and manage out-of-line situations. The next work stream is to look at increasing revenue. The most common problem we encounter in working with hundreds of professional services firms is the inability of the firm to articulate its value proposition. Every firm can talk about what they do. Far fewer can demonstrate the benefits, the outcomes, the results their clients will receive. Now that's the precursor to be able to put up your prices. And I want to underline the point you made earlier, Paul, about the job of marketing, which is to get high quality warm leads. And of course, once those leads get to the proposal stage, you want to make sure the bid process locks in good margins. In terms of reducing delivery costs, these are in priority order rather. The engagement management process is key if profits are to improve. That means proper staffing, proper delegation, and efficient use of people's time. Increasing leverage of seniors to juniors is a critical long-term issue to ensure that high-priced staff aren't wasted on doing lower-value tasks, which could be done by well-trained juniors. And in terms of optimizing overheads, this work stream should analyze overheads and drive towards 30%, remembering it's as easy to underspend here as it is to overspend. So, Paul, I've been keeping an eye on the questions that have been coming in. And the first one, which I like very much, is you mentioned earlier that a good rule of thumb is for a consultancy to achieve 20% EBIT. So the first question is, does that mean that a firm achieving 40% EBIT would be considerably more valuable?
Well, yes, provided, of course, that a buyer believes that that level is sustainable. But they might look at a 40% margin and question whether it's been achieved by underinvesting in the business, and if so, they'll actually discount it back down to 20 or 25%. So it might be that you're better off investing any EBIT above, say, 25% in growing the top line instead.
Okay, dokie. Well, the next question, let me read this to you. It said, we already have long-term contracts with our clients, and these do not allow for increasing prices. What can we do to drive up margin with those clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, if there's no opportunity to increase the fees because of the contract, then the focus needs to be on delivering the work with lower cost resources. And you can do that by getting better with templates and methodologies and IP. But you should bear in mind that long-term contracts are seen as more valuable to a buyer because they're more predictable. So having them is generally beneficial to growing equity value. But of course, you do actually need to get the good prices locked in at the very start. It's difficult to push them up once you've started.
Yeah. Yes, and another question here, this is, I think, around the leverage question or the leverage issue that we raised earlier, Paul. Let me read you this one. It says, we find it very difficult to get our senior people to delegate to more junior staff. What do you advise?
Yeah, this is a very common problem. I mean, consultants, let's face it, love consulting, and it can be difficult to stop doing it. So if I try to think of some specifics, I think you have to be responsible for delivering margin, and that means allocating the costs to them and to the projects. And obviously, senior people cost more than junior people, so they have to have a motivation for using juniors rather than seniors. And then when you create the project plan at the beginning of the engagement, you have to do the plan in such a way as to deliver the target margin. And that process needs to be carefully defined. You might need some exception criteria so that, you know, if you do have to use a more senior staff, then you can get that signed off. But that needs to be done formally. I think the other thing I'd say is have a look at your reward systems. So, for example, if utilization is used as the primary driver of reward, well, it's little wonder that project managers don't delegate and keep too much of the delivery work for themselves. So consider using margin as the reward mechanism instead, especially as you should be measuring it anyway. And I suppose the final thing is a word to the senior people themselves. I think they should ask themselves, how much value am I actually creating in the business for every hour that I spend delivering services? And how much more value could I create if I was spending that hour selling more business or developing IP for my colleagues to use?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know if it was just me, Paul, but the sound went a little Dalek-y when you first started answering the question. So, you know, getting senior people to delegate, you said about people have to be responsible, senior people have to be responsible for delivering margins on engagements. That was the first point you were making, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Now, there's some other questions that we don't have time to get to, but we will get back to you individually, one-to-one, with those, to discuss the answers to those questions. So we want to leave you with some homework, if you like, and some further help. To put margins at the center of your business thinking, create a plan with the 4 work streams that we described a moment ago. Create a baseline, increase the tasks to increase revenue, to reduce delivery costs, and to optimize overheads. And of course, make sure there's a timeline with accountabilities, because then you're able to deliver the plan. So in terms of moving forward, for more insights on margin improvement, we'd like to invite you to tune in to our next webinar, which will be delivered by our colleague Jason Parks. And if in the meantime you'd like to discuss any of the issues raised in this webinar or some of your questions, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Sophie, back to you.
Thanks for that, guys. Just like to say, obviously, if you're not already a member, then please do join our Equiteq Edge Club. It's a free source of information. We put up blogs, unique research, we've got expert guidance, articles, newsletters. Also, I just want to mention the next webinar, part 2, will be at the same time on the 18th of April. You can access that via our webinar page on our website, and you'll also be getting an email about it. And I just wanted to say thank you to Paul and Pat for a very insightful presentation, and apologise for our technical issues today. So thanks, Pat and Paul.
Most welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.